The researchers cite a figure that there were at least 493 attacks on humans, leading to 354 fatalities.
For nearly 2 million years, two apex predators, the American alligator and the American crocodile, have ruled the Florida Everglades. Nothing challenged them because they sat at the very top of the food chain. But that balance has started to break in a terrifying way. These dominant predators are suddenly abandoning territories they controlled for decades. They're not starving. They aren't even dying. They're simply disappearing. And for an apex predator, that should never happen. According to wildlife researchers, this points to only one thing: something bigger, something far more aggressive has entered the Everglades. But while everyone blamed the Everglades' most famous monster, the Burmese python, an even more dangerous predator may have been hiding in plain sight. So, what is really hiding in the Everglades? And has Florida been fighting the wrong invasion all along? Before we answer those questions, we need to go back to where it all began. The impossible encounter. March 2012. A routine night patrol in South Florida was about to witness one of the strangest wildlife encounters in the state's history. The location was the C-111 Canal Basin, often called the Cheatham Drain, just outside Homestead. It isn't just another canal. It's one of the places where fresh water flowing out of the Everglades meets increasingly salty water on its way toward Florida Bay. Because of that, it's a natural highway for wildlife, especially large predators. That's exactly why officers patrol it after dark. More than 80% of crocodilian hunting and territorial movement happens at night. So spotlight surveys are standard practice. The job is simple. Sweep the water with a powerful light and count the glowing eyes looking back. Those glowing eyes aren't random. Behind the retina is a reflective layer called the tapetum lucidum. Think of it like a tiny mirror that gives the animal a second chance to use whatever light reaches its eyes. It's why crocodilians seem to glow in the dark, and experienced officers can often identify what they're looking at before they ever see the body. But that night, something didn't add up. Two red eyes appeared near the bank. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then one officer quietly said, "Hold the light." It wasn't the color that caught his attention. It was the distance between the eyes. Wildlife officers don't estimate body length in the dark because water can easily fool your eyes. Instead, they judge skull size. The wider the eyes, the wider the skull. And skull width doesn't lie. Even massive 13-foot American alligators rarely have more than 6 or 7 inches between their eyes, while American crocodiles have even narrower heads. The animal in front of them didn't fit either profile. Then it did something even harder to explain. Instead of sliding into the water as almost every alligator or crocodile would, it lifted its entire body off the ground in a full high walk. Its legs moved beneath it, almost like a mammal's, and it covered the muddy bank at nearly 14 kilometers per hour, faster than an average person jogs, before disappearing into the sawgrass. The officers searched the area, found tracks, filed a report, and waited for someone to take it seriously. Instead, it was logged as an unverified sighting, probably a trick of the light. Maybe a large alligator seen from a bad angle. The file was closed, and the patrol moved on. But what they didn't know was that this wasn't an isolated encounter. Across South Florida, something far more terrifying had already begun. A kingdom disturbed. To understand why that sighting mattered, you first have to understand the Everglades itself. From above, it looks like one endless swamp. In reality, it's a giant moving river, nearly 60 miles wide, flowing slowly from Lake Okeechobee to Florida Bay. As that fresh water moves south, it gradually mixes with seawater, creating a narrow brackish zone where both worlds meet. That natural boundary has separated Florida's largest reptiles for thousands of years. In the freshwater interior, the American alligator rules. It isn't built for saltwater because it lacks the special salt glands that true crocodiles use to remove excess salt. Its broad head and crushing jaws are powerful enough to crack turtle shells and bring down almost anything that comes too close. Closer to the coast, a different ruler takes over. The American crocodile has working salt glands, a narrow snout built for catching fast-moving fish, and a surprisingly shy nature. Despite its size, there has never been a confirmed fatal attack by a wild American crocodile in the United States. Today, its largest breeding population lives around Turkey Point, where warm, salty canals provide the perfect habitat. For generations, these two apex predators rarely challenged each other. One ruled fresh water, the other ruled the coast. The balance seemed unbreakable. Then it started to change. Researchers tracking American crocodiles noticed something they had never seen before. Large adults that had occupied the same territory for 15 or even 20 years had suddenly disappeared. Not dead, gone. For an apex predator, that is a major warning sign. A territory is where it hunts, nests, breeds, and survives. Dominant crocodiles don't abandon it unless they have no choice. At first, researchers blamed changing water levels or food shortages, but the fish were still there. The food supply hadn't collapsed, which left only one explanation. Something bigger, something more aggressive had entered their world. But instead of following that clue, scientists, wildlife officers, and the public all focused on a far more obvious threat, one that had already captured headlines across Florida and dominated every conversation: the perfect distraction. That obvious threat was the Burmese python. By the late 2000s, these giant snakes had become Florida's biggest wildlife story. Released or escaped from the exotic pet trade, they found exactly what they needed in the Everglades: endless food, warm weather, and almost no natural predators. What followed was one of the fastest ecosystem collapses ever recorded in North America. Wildlife surveys found shocking numbers. In some areas, raccoon populations dropped by 99.3%, opossums by 98.9%, and marsh rabbits disappeared completely. Even bobcats and deer became much harder to find. The crisis was so severe that nearly all wildlife resources shifted toward one goal: stopping pythons. And that's where the real problem began. When everyone believes they've already found the monster, they stop looking for another one. Scientists call it confirmation bias. It doesn't happen because people aren't smart. It happens because they're overwhelmed. Every strange sighting, every missing animal, and every unusual carcass was quickly given the same explanation. It was probably a python. But the people who spent every day on the water weren't convinced. Airboat guides, bass fishermen, crab trappers, and experienced hunters kept describing the same strange animal. They said it didn't behave like an alligator or an American crocodile. Instead of diving underwater when a boat approached, it stayed exactly where it was. Its head remained above the surface, and as the boat passed, it slowly turned to keep watching. Not out of curiosity, almost like it was studying them. Many of these witnesses had never met, yet years apart, they described the same unsettling behavior. Then came another clue: the carcasses. A python leaves behind a very specific signature. It kills by squeezing its prey until the heart stops, then swallows it whole. If the feeding is interrupted, the body is usually left mostly intact. These bodies looked nothing like that. They had been ripped apart. Flesh was torn away. Bones were badly damaged. At first, investigators blamed alligators because crocodilians use the famous death roll to tear apart prey. But the evidence didn't fit. The bite marks were too wide for native alligators. The wounds were too deep for American crocodiles. Even the injury patterns didn't fully match either species. Someone, or something, was leaving behind a signature that didn't belong to any predator Florida was supposed to have. Then, in 2009, investigators finally got a living specimen, something they had been missing all along. And the moment scientists examined it, every comfortable explanation began falling apart. When nothing matched. That living specimen came from the Miami Canal, a deep man-made waterway stretching from Lake Okeechobee toward the Miami coast. Unlike the shallow marshes, it acts like a highway for large aquatic animals, allowing them to move across South Florida. At first glance, the animal didn't seem remarkable. It was just a juvenile crocodile, barely longer than a man's forearm. But the longer experienced herpetologists studied it, the stranger it became. They couldn't explain it immediately. It was more like a feeling. Everything looked almost right, but not quite. The snout seemed heavier. The skull rose at a different angle. Even the nostrils sat differently. Most people would never notice. But scientists who had handled hundreds of Florida crocodiles knew something was wrong. Then they examined its armor. Under a crocodile's skin are tiny bony plates called osteoderms, covered by hard scales known as scutes. They work like natural body armor. In Native American crocodiles, those scutes are uneven and irregular. This animal was different. Its armor formed neat, symmetrical rows that looked almost designed instead of grown. The pattern was so precise that some researchers later said it looked almost manufactured. Then came the biggest surprise. Young American crocodiles usually freeze when captured. Biologists call this tonic immobility, a survival response where the animal goes limp and stays still. This juvenile did the exact opposite. It fought relentlessly. The longer it was held, the more aggressive it became. It twisted, snapped, and lunged with a level of determination the handlers had never seen. Then it let out a deep, rumbling growl, the kind normally heard from large territorial adults, not an animal barely a year old. Naturally, theories spread. Some blamed the warm canals around the Turkey Point nuclear power plant, imagining a radioactive mutation. Others suggested an alligator and crocodile hybrid. But that idea collapsed immediately. The two groups split nearly 80 million years ago, making such a cross genetically impossible. Even the theory of a hybrid between different crocodile species failed to explain its unusual anatomy and behavior. Every explanation solved one piece of the puzzle and created three new ones. So there was only one way to end the debate, once and for all. Scientists stopped studying the animal's body and started studying the one thing that couldn't lie, its DNA. And when the results came back, they didn't just identify the animal, they completely changed the story. What DNA revealed? Scientists took the tissue sample from the animal's tail. That's standard practice. The tail provides plenty of healthy cells without causing lasting harm to the crocodile. But what mattered wasn't where the sample came from, it was what scientists were looking for. Instead of studying ordinary DNA, they focused on mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA. Unlike regular DNA, which comes from both parents, mitochondrial DNA is inherited only from the mother. Because it changes very slowly over time, it's one of the most reliable ways to identify an animal's species and even trace where its ancestors came from. The key was a small genetic marker called the cytochrome B gene, often considered the gold standard for identifying wildlife species. When the results came back in May 2016, there was no debate left. The sample was a 100% genetic match to the Nile crocodile, Crocodilus niloticus, not the shy American crocodile Florida had always known. The Nile crocodile, one of Africa's most feared apex predators. Unlike American crocodiles, which mostly feed on fish and usually avoid people, Nile crocodiles are built to hunt almost anything they can overpower. Their wider skulls and powerful jaw muscles let them take down large mammals, and across sub-Saharan Africa, they are linked to more than 200 fatal attacks on humans every year. Suddenly, every strange clue started making sense. The unusually broad skull, the aggressive behavior, the refusal to back down, the high walk, the bite marks that didn't match any native species, but the DNA revealed something even more surprising. It didn't just identify the species. It pointed to where these animals had come from. The genetic markers traced their maternal lineage to southern Africa, not East or West Africa, ruling out most legal zoo populations in the United States. Combined with growth data, researchers concluded these crocodiles had likely been living in the Everglades since the late 1990s or early 2000s, during a period when exotic reptiles entered Florida with far less oversight than today. The evidence pointed toward something much more deliberate than a single escaped pet. Most likely, several young Nile crocodiles had been illegally imported, then intentionally released into the Everglades. Then researchers compared the DNA from animals captured in 2009, 2011, and 2014. The results were almost unbelievable. They all shared the same maternal genetic line. These weren't random escapees, they were family. And that meant Florida wasn't dealing with isolated crocodiles anymore. It was dealing with a breeding population, which raised one terrifying question. If these were the offspring, where were the parents? The missing founders. The DNA solved one mystery, but it created an even bigger one. If every captured Nile crocodile shared the same maternal DNA, they weren't random animals released years apart. They were siblings, and siblings meant one thing with absolute certainty. Somewhere in South Florida, there had been at least one breeding pair. That completely changed the timeline. Nile crocodiles don't reproduce overnight. In the wild, they usually need 10 to 12 years to reach sexual maturity. Since the captured offspring were born in the mid to late 2000s, their parents had to arrive much earlier, most likely between 1998 and 2000. That meant two fully grown African crocodiles had entered the Everglades, settled in, reproduced, and disappeared before anyone even realized they were there. Think about what that really means. These weren't small reptiles hiding under logs. Adult Nile crocodiles can grow 12 to 16 feet long and weigh well over 500 pounds. Even more surprising, they survived everything Florida threw at them. A crocodile that grows faster reaches breeding age sooner, becomes larger than native rivals of the same age, and takes over the best territory long before local animals have a chance to compete. Suddenly, the disappearing American crocodiles made perfect sense. They weren't simply moving away, they were being replaced. And if one hidden family could quietly change an entire ecosystem, the real question wasn't whether they had survived. It was how many more were out there. Because if these crocodiles had been breeding for years, the Everglades could already be fighting a battle no one even realized had begun. An unfinished invasion. So, where does that leave Florida today? The honest answer is, nobody knows for sure. The Everglades covers more than 1.5 million acres of wetlands. Vast fields of sawgrass can grow nearly 10 feet tall. Add thousands of miles of remote canals, flooded forests, limestone overhangs, and underwater hiding places, and you have one of the hardest landscapes on Earth to search. That's what makes a small population so dangerous. Unlike pythons, which spread in huge numbers, a few large crocodiles don't need to be everywhere. A Nile crocodile can live for 60 to 80 years, and a single female can lay between 25 and 80 eggs every year. That means, given enough time, even a single breeding pair could quietly build an entire population, powerful enough to change the Florida Everglades forever. But that's not all. There are two other major concerns. The first is the idea of a super crocodile created by Nile crocodiles breeding with American alligators. It sounds terrifying, but scientists have completely rejected that theory. As we mentioned earlier, alligators and crocodiles split from each other around 80 million years ago. They're simply too genetically different to produce offspring. The second concern is far more realistic and far more unsettling. While Nile crocodiles can't breed with alligators, they can theoretically breed with Florida's Native American crocodiles because they're members of the same genus. Scientists have never confirmed that this has happened in the wild. But if even a small breeding population has remained hidden for years, it's a possibility researchers can't completely rule out. And maybe that's the biggest lesson of this entire story. While everyone was focused on the loud, obvious python invasion, another apex predator had already slipped into the Everglades almost unnoticed. And after hearing it all, do you think the original Nile crocodiles, or their descendants, are still hiding somewhere in the Everglades? And if they are, could Florida stop them in time? Or is this already the beginning of the state's next major wildlife invasion? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you want more incredible discoveries and true stories like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.